The battleship USS Pennsylvania, flagship of Rear Admiral Thomas C. Kinkaid's bombardment force, positioned herself 3,000 yards off Attu Island's southern coast on the morning of May 11, 1943. Her main battery of 12 14-inch guns elevating toward Japanese defensive positions carved into volcanic hillsides above Massacre Bay, where Major General Albert E. Brown's 7th Infantry Division prepared to execute amphibious assault on the only American territory occupied by Japanese forces during World War II. The Pennsylvania's fire control radar struggled to identify targets through dense Arctic fog that blanketed the island. Visibility reduced to hundreds of yards at best. But when the order came at 0600 hours, the battleship's main guns spoke with authority that shook the frozen landscape, 14-inch armor-piercing shells screaming across 3,000 yards to impact Japanese bunkers with explosions that sent volcanic rock and frozen earth erupting skyward in massive geysers visible even through the obscuring mist. The naval bombardment supporting Operation Landcrab represented unprecedented concentration of American naval power in Arctic waters. USS Pennsylvania, supported by battleship USS Idaho, and heavy cruisers USS San Francisco and USS Wichita, combined throwing thousands of pounds of high-explosive ordnance at Japanese positions in preparatory fires, designed to soften defenses before infantry landed on frozen volcanic beaches. The Idaho's 9 16-inch guns added their weight to the bombardment, each shell weighing over 2,000 pounds and capable of penetrating reinforced concrete bunkers or collapsing underground positions that Japanese engineers had spent months constructing in volcanic rock hillsides overlooking the landing beaches. The cruiser's 8-inch batteries contributed rapid fire against point targets when fog conditions permitted visual identification, their higher rate of fire supplementing battleships' raw destructive power with volume that kept Japanese defenders pinned in their shelters, unable to prepare beach defenses against approaching landing craft. Colonel Yasuyo Yamasaki, commanding the Japanese garrison of approximately 2,600 troops on Attu, observed the American naval bombardment from his command post dug deep into volcanic hillside above Chichagof Harbor on the island's north coast. Understanding that the intensity of American naval gunfire presaged major assault operation and that his outnumbered garrison would face overwhelming force once American infantry established beachhead and pushed inland from landing sites. Yamasaki's defensive preparations emphasized underground positions that could withstand naval bombardment, bunkers connected by tunnels allowing defenders to move under cover between firing positions, ammunition storage in protected magazines, and fallback positions on high ground, where American numerical superiority would be offset by terrain advantages, and where Japanese troops could conduct defense in depth that would exact maximum cost for every yard of frozen volcanic ground. The American assault force approaching Attu in landing craft through fog and freezing Arctic waters included elements of 7th Infantry Division that had been training for amphibious operations, but not specifically for Arctic combat conditions they would encounter on Volcanic Island, where temperature hovered around -30 degrees Celsius and where snow covered terrain, despite calendar indicating mid-May date, when temperate latitudes would have experienced spring conditions. General Brown, commanding the ground assault from transport ship offshore, monitored radio reports from landing force as first wave of infantry hit beaches at Massacre Bay and Holtz Bay simultaneously, attempting to catch Japanese defenders between two converging thrusts that would squeeze Yamasaki's garrison against coastline, where naval gunfire and airstrikes could interdict any Japanese attempts to concentrate forces or conduct coordinated counterattacks. The air support component for Operation Landcrab faced unique challenges operating in Aleutian weather conditions, where fog, wind, and low cloud ceiling limited flight operations to brief windows. When visibility improved enough for pilots to identify targets without risk of flying into volcanic mountainsides or disorienting in featureless gray void that characterized Arctic fog conditions. B-24 Liberator heavy bombers from 11th Air Force, based at Attu Island, flew missions against Attu when weather permitted. 4 engine bombers carrying loads of 500 and 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs intended to crater Japanese positions and destroy bunkers that naval gunfire might miss. The B-24 crews discovered that bombing through solid overcast required radar navigation and blind drops based on calculated positions rather than visual identification of targets, resulting in scattered bomb patterns that sometimes missed intended aim points by hundreds of yards, but that maintained psychological pressure on Japanese defenders, who never knew when explosions might rain from invisible aircraft flying above impenetrable fog layer. P-38 Lightning twin-engine fighters provided combat air patrol over invasion fleet when weather allowed. Distinctive twin-boom aircraft patrolling at medium altitude, watching for any Japanese air attacks from Kiska Island to north, where Japanese maintained larger garrison and airfield capable of launching strike missions. The P-38 pilots saw no Japanese air opposition during Attu campaign. Combination of distance from Japanese bases, poor weather conditions, and American air superiority established during preceding months of Aleutian operations having effectively eliminated Japanese ability to contest American air operations over Attu despite presence of Japanese aircraft at other Aleutian bases. The absence of Japanese air attacks allowed American bombers and patrol aircraft to operate with minimal fighter escort, freeing P-38s for ground attack missions when visibility permitted strafing runs against Japanese positions visible from air. The landing at Massacre Bay proceeded against minimal immediate Japanese opposition. American infantry wading ashore through freezing surf onto volcanic beaches shrouded in fog so dense that soldiers could barely see comrades who were meters away, the obscuring mist providing inadvertent concealment that allowed landing force to establish beachhead before Japanese defenders could organize effective response. General Brown's plan called for rapid advance inland to seize high ground dominating the valleys where American forces had landed, recognizing that Japanese holding the ridges above landing beaches could make American position untenable through observed artillery fire and infantry attacks from higher elevation. The advance inland through fog became exercise in blind navigation, units maintaining cohesion through strict march discipline and constant communication via radio and runner, while scouts probed ahead searching for Japanese positions that materialized suddenly out of gray void, at ranges measured in meters rather than hundreds of yards. The Japanese defensive positions that American infantry encountered as they pushed inland from Massacre Bay demonstrated months of preparation, bunkers built into volcanic hillsides with multiple feet of earth and rock overhead providing protection against even direct hits from naval shells, firing ports positioned to cover approaches with interlocking fields of fire, and tunnels connecting positions allowing defenders to shift between locations without exposing themselves to American observation or fire. The Type 92 heavy machine guns that Japanese defenders employed from these bunkers fired 7.7 mm rounds at cyclic rate of 450 rounds per minute, effective range exceeding 1,000 yards in clear conditions, though fog limited engagement distances to fraction of maximum range during most of Attu campaign. American infantry assaulting these positions learned quickly that frontal attacks against prepared Japanese bunkers resulted in heavy casualties without achieving objectives, necessitating development of tactics that emphasized flanking maneuvers, suppressive fire from supporting weapons, and careful coordination between infantry and supporting arms to isolate and reduce Japanese strongpoints systematically rather than through costly direct assaults. The 105 mm howitzers of divisional artillery that General Brown's forces brought ashore during first days of operation provided critical fire support for infantry operations, though Arctic conditions and difficult terrain complicated artillery employment significantly compared to operations in temperate climates. The howitzers firing from positions near landing beaches could range most of Ireland, with maximum effective range exceeding 11,000 yards. High explosive shells weighing 33 pounds, carrying significant destructive power against Japanese positions, when forward observers could identify targets and call accurate fire missions. The challenges of artillery support in dense fog conditions led to development of techniques for firing on map coordinates based on intelligence estimates and pre-planned targets, rather than on observed fire, accepting lower accuracy in exchange for maintaining fire support capability when visual observation was impossible due to weather. The critical terrain feature dominating the southern approach to Japanese positions was Engineer Hill, a steep volcanic ridge rising several hundred feet above surrounding valleys and providing observation over both Massacre Bay Landing beaches and the trail network leading inland toward Japanese headquarters area near Chichagof Harbor. General Brown recognized that Engineer Hill represented key terrain that must be seized to allow further advance, but Japanese defenders had fortified the position extensively, with bunkers positioned to cover all approach routes, and with artillery observers directing fire from mountain guns positioned on reverse slopes where American counter-battery fire could not reach them effectively. The assault on Engineer Hill began on May 14th, after 3 days of preliminary operations to establish supply lines and concentrate forces for major attack. American infantry advancing uphill through snow and frozen mud under Japanese machine gun and rifle fire while supporting 105th Liberator howitzers fired preparatory bombardment attempting to suppress Japanese defensive fires. The battle for Engineer Hill exemplified challenges of Arctic warfare, where fog concealed movements but also prevented effective artillery support, where frozen ground made digging foxholes nearly impossible, forcing troops to shelter behind volcanic rocks, and where cold weather injuries accumulated rapidly among soldiers exposed for hours to -30-degree temperatures while conducting combat operations. American infantry discovered that standard infantry tactics developed for temperate climate operations required modification for Arctic conditions. Wet clothing, freezing solid, became life-threatening liability rather than merely uncomfortable inconvenience. Maintaining body heat required constant attention, competing with tactical requirements, and hypothermia degraded combat effectiveness as quickly as Japanese fire. The advance up Engineer Hill took 2 days of continuous fighting before American forces finally secured the crest. Japanese defenders retreating to fallback positions after American numerical superiority and supporting fires made continued defense of forward positions untenable despite excellent fields of fire and prepared fortifications. USS Pennsylvania resumed bombardment of Japanese positions as American infantry consolidated hold on Engineer Hill. Battleships, 14-inch guns targeting Japanese artillery positions, and command posts identified through aerial reconnaissance and radio intercepts that provided intelligence about Japanese defensive organization. The Pennsylvania's fire control radar allowed engagement of targets beyond visual range in fog conditions, though accuracy suffered compared to visual ranging that would have been possible in clear weather. One particularly effective strike demolished Japanese headquarters bunker near Chichagof Harbor, when 14-inch armor-piercing shell penetrated overhead cover and detonated inside command post, explosion collapsing tunnels and burying Japanese command staff who had believed themselves safe in underground position. The success demonstrated that even well-protected Japanese positions remained vulnerable to heavy naval gunfire when American forces could identify locations accurately enough to direct fire effectively. B-25 Mitchell medium bombers joined B-24 Liberators in striking Japanese positions during brief windows of improved visibility. Twin-engine B-25s operating at lower altitude than four-engine B-24s and carrying mixed loads of general-purpose bombs and incendiary weapons intended to set fire to any combustible materials in Japanese positions. The B-25 crews found that low-level attack runs allowed more accurate bombing than high-altitude B-24 strikes, but exposed aircraft to Japanese anti-aircraft fire from positions equipped with Type 93 13mm heavy machine guns the Japanese employed in anti-aircraft role. Several B-25s sustained damage from Japanese anti-aircraft fire during strafing runs, bullet holes, and shell fragments, pocking aluminum skin, though all aircraft returned to base after completing missions that dropped tons of explosives on Japanese defensive positions scattered across Attu's volcanic terrain. The Japanese defense under Colonel Yamasaki adapted to American tactics by emphasizing nighttime operations when fog and darkness provided concealment for movement. Counterattacks launched in early morning hours against American positions that had been identified during previous days' fighting, infiltration tactics that bypassed American strongpoints to attack supply lines and command posts, and conservation of ammunition through fire discipline that emphasized quality over quantity in defensive engagements. Yamasaki understood that his garrison could not win conventional defensive battle against American forces, with overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower, but could extract maximum cost for American victory through determined resistance that exploited terrain advantages and Arctic conditions that affected American forces more severely than Japanese troops who had spent months adapting to Aleutian environment. The replacement of General Brown by Brigadier General Eugene Landrum on May 16th reflected frustration at higher command levels with pace of American advance, expectations that overwhelming American superiority would allow rapid victory proving overly optimistic given combination of difficult terrain, extreme weather, and determined Japanese resistance. Landrum, arriving on Attu, assessed tactical situation and determined that systematic reduction of Japanese positions through coordinated employment of infantry and supporting arms offered better chance of success than hasty attacks that had characterized initial operations. The change in command philosophy led to more deliberate operations with heavy preparatory bombardments from naval guns and artillery, careful reconnaissance to identify Japanese positions, and infantry advances supported by tanks and tank destroyers that had been landed during early phase of operations but initially employed piecemeal rather than concentrated for maximum effect. The M4 Sherman medium tanks and M10 tank destroyers supporting American infantry on Attu operated under severe constraints imposed by volcanic terrain and Arctic weather, frozen ground limiting cross-country mobility to areas where volcanic rock provided adequate bearing strength, steep slopes channeling armored vehicles along predictable routes that Japanese anti-tank weapons could cover, and mechanical reliability challenges in -30-degree temperatures that froze lubricants and degraded engine performance. Despite these limitations, the presence of armor provided psychological boost to American infantry and direct fire support against Japanese bunkers, 75mm guns on Sherman tanks, and 3-inch guns on M10 tank destroyers engaging Japanese positions at point-blank range with armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds that penetrated bunker walls or collapsed overhead cover through repeated impacts. The Japanese defensive line along Fish Hook Ridge represented final organized position before American forces would break through to Chichagof Harbor area, where Yamasaki maintained his headquarters and where remaining Japanese supplies and ammunition were concentrated. The Fish Hook Ridge position exploited natural terrain advantages, a volcanic ridgeline that dominated surrounding valleys. Japanese engineers having constructed interconnected bunker system along ridgeline with excellent fields of fire covering all approach routes and with reverse slope positions providing shelter from American artillery fire. General Landrum, recognizing the strength of Japanese positions, ordered 3 days of continuous bombardment before infantry assault, USS Idaho and USS Pennsylvania joining cruisers, USS Wichita and USS Louisville in systematic destruction of identified Japanese positions, thousands of naval shells impacting along Fish Hook Ridge in preparation fires that turned volcanic hillside into cratered moonscape, where shell bursts had pulverized rock and frozen earth. The American assault on Fish Hook Ridge, launched on May 21st, involved coordinated attacks by multiple infantry battalions supported by tanks, artillery, and airstrikes, overwhelming force designed to crack Japanese defensive line through sheer weight of firepower and numbers that Japanese garrison could not match. The preliminary bombardment from naval guns and 105mm howitzers lasted 4 hours, high-explosive shells systematically working over Japanese positions, while American infantry moved into assault positions in valleys below ridge. When bombardment lifted, American troops advanced up volcanic slopes under cover of smoke shells fired to conceal movement, though dense fog already limited visibility, making smoke screens partially redundant but providing additional concealment that prevented Japanese observers from calling accurate fire on advancing American forces. The M4 Sherman tanks supporting infantry advance up Fish Hook Ridge engaged Japanese bunkers with 75mm guns, firing high-explosive rounds at bunker apertures, attempting to suppress Japanese defensive fire. Tank commanders coordinating with infantry to identify targets and provide direct fire support against positions that pinned American troops. One Sherman, knocked out by Japanese Type 94, 37mm anti-tank gun firing from concealed position, demonstrated that Japanese retained capability to engage American armor despite overwhelming American firepower advantage, armor-piercing round-penetrating Sherman's hull side, and disabling vehicle, though crew escaped without serious injury. The presence of Japanese anti-tank weapons forced American armor to advance carefully with infantry support. Combined arms tactics, emphasizing mutual support between tanks, providing firepower, and infantry, providing security against Japanese infantry, with demolition charges and magnetic mines that could disable tanks if defenders reached them undetected. B-24 Liberator bombers from 11th Air Force conducted maximum effort strike on Fish Hook Ridge on May 22nd, 18 four-engine bombers dropping 108 500-pound bombs in area saturation attack intended to crater Japanese positions and destroy bunkers through sheer explosive force. The bombing run achieved mixed results, with several bombs impacting directly on Japanese positions and collapsing bunkers, while many others fell on unoccupied terrain due to difficulty of precision bombing through cloud cover and fog that obscured target area. Japanese survivors of bombardment reported that psychological impact of massive bombing raid exceeded physical damage, constant explosions and concussive effects creating terror even among veterans who had withstood previous American attacks. Though well-constructed Japanese bunkers protected most defenders from direct effects of bombing, provided they remained in shelters during attack. The PBY Catalina flying boats operating from Dutch Harbor provided crucial search and rescue capability for American air operations, twin-engine amphibians patrolling waters around Attu, ready to recover any bomber or fighter crews who had to ditch in freezing Arctic waters after sustaining battle damage or mechanical failures. The PBY crews flew in conditions that challenged aircraft and pilot capabilities, low visibility and rough seas making water landings dangerous, while frigid water temperatures meant that downed aircrew had only minutes to be rescued before hypothermia became life-threatening. The rescue of B-24 crew, whose bomber ditched after losing engine to Japanese anti-aircraft fire, demonstrated PBY effectiveness. Flying boat landing in rough seas to recover crew before they succumbed to cold. All aircrew surviving despite spending 20 minutes in water that would have been fatal with longer exposure. The Japanese Type 91 105mm mountain howitzers that Yamasaki employed for artillery support of defensive operations provided Japanese forces with indirect fire capability that partially offset American superiority in heavy artillery. lighter Japanese mountain guns being more suited to difficult Attu terrain than heavier American weapons, and positioned on reverse slopes where American counter-battery fire could not engage them effectively. The Japanese artillery conducted harassment fires against American positions and supply routes rather than sustained bombardments, limited ammunition supply forcing Japanese gunners to conserve rounds for critical moments when accurate fire could disrupt American operations. One particularly effective Japanese artillery strike hit American ammunition dump near Massacre Bay. Explosions from detonating American ordnance creating secondary blasts that destroyed significant quantities of supplies and forced temporary halt to American offensive operations while new supply dump was established at more secure location. Admiral Kinkaid, commanding naval forces supporting Attu operation, maintained continuous presence of warships offshore, ready to provide gunfire support for ground operations. Fire support teams attached to infantry battalions coordinating naval gun strikes against Japanese positions through radio communications that allowed relatively rapid engagement of targets identified by forward observers. The effectiveness of naval gunfire support depended heavily on accurate target location data and clear communications. Difficulties increased by fog and terrain that limited visibility, and by Japanese jamming attempts that degraded radio communications at critical moments. Despite these challenges, naval gunfire remained most powerful, supporting arm available to American ground forces. 14- and 16-inch guns delivering destructive power against Japanese fortifications that no land-based weapon could match. Battleship salvos capable of collapsing even heavily reinforced bunkers through direct hits or near misses that created concussive effects sufficient to stun defenders and damage fortifications. The collapse of Japanese defensive line along Fish Hook Ridge by May 25th left Colonel Yamasaki with approximately 500 effective troops concentrated near Chichagof Harbor, ammunition supplies nearly exhausted, food reduced to minimal daily rations, and medical facilities overwhelmed with wounded and frostbite casualties who required care that Japanese medical staff could no longer provide given complete lack of supplies and medications. Yamasaki, understanding that tactical situation was hopeless, with no possibility of reinforcement or evacuation, began planning final operation that would demonstrate Japanese fighting spirit even in defeat, organizing remaining able-bodied soldiers for desperate assault that would attack American positions in attempt to inflict maximum casualties before Japanese defensive capability collapsed completely. The decision to conduct banzai charge represented acknowledgement that organized resistance could not continue much longer against overwhelming American pressure. Final attack offering honorable end to garrison that had fought stubbornly for 2 weeks against superior forces. The Japanese banzai charge, launched in early morning hours of May 29th, came out of fog-shrouded hills above American positions near Engineer Hill. Approximately 800 Japanese soldiers attacking in wave that caught some American units by surprise, despite general expectation that Japanese forces would eventually launch such assault. The charge included not just infantry, but also wounded soldiers from aid stations, support personnel, and headquarters staff armed with whatever weapons remained available after 2 weeks of intensive combat had depleted Japanese ammunition stocks. The attacking Japanese troops moved through dense fog that concealed their approach until they were within meters of American foxholes. Initial waves overwhelming several American positions before defenders could organize coherent response to sudden assault emerging from Arctic mist. The American defensive response to Japanese banzai charge involved intensive small arms fire from rifles, carbines, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles, combined firepower from multiple infantry companies creating wall of fire that stopped most Japanese attackers, though some penetrated deep into American rear areas, reaching supply dumps and medical stations before being stopped by cooks, clerks, and medical personnel who grabbed weapons to defend positions against Japanese soldiers who had broken through frontline defenses. One Japanese group reached American Field Hospital, where they engaged in close combat with medical staff and wounded before being overwhelmed by American reinforcements, desperate fighting in confined spaces with rifles, pistols, and edged weapons demonstrating ferocity of final Japanese resistance, even when tactical situation was obviously hopeless. The M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine guns positioned in American defensive perimeter proved particularly effective against massed Japanese attack. Heavy machine guns firing 650 rounds per minute of 50 caliber ammunition that could penetrate cover and stop multiple attackers with single burst. The psychological impact of concentrated machine gun fire helped break momentum of Japanese charge as attackers recognized impossibility of reaching American positions through such defensive firepower. Survivors of initial assault waves seeking cover or attempting to withdraw rather than continuing forward into certain destruction. By mid-morning of May 29th, the Japanese banzai charge had exhausted itself, several hundred Japanese soldiers having been stopped by American defensive fires, while survivors scattered into hills where American forces would spend additional days clearing final pockets of resistance. The final mopping-up operations on Attu, after collapse of Japanese banzai charge, involved systematic searches of volcanic caves and bunkers where Japanese survivors might be hiding. American infantry advancing cautiously through terrain where any position might conceal armed Japanese defenders refusing to surrender, despite hopelessness of continued resistance. The discovery of Japanese aid stations filled with wounded who had received minimal medical care revealed extent of Japanese suffering during campaign. Frostbite casualties showing severe tissue damage from prolonged exposure to -30-degree temperatures. Malnutrition evident among survivors who had been subsisting on reduced rations for weeks, and general deterioration of physical condition that demonstrated harshness of Arctic warfare conditions even for defenders who had spent months adapting to a Aleutian environment. The American casualties from Attu campaign totaled approximately 550 combat losses, with additional 1,100 wounded and over 1,800 non-combat casualties primarily from cold weather injuries including frostbite, trench foot, and hypothermia that required medical evacuation. The high rate of non-combat casualties demonstrated that Arctic conditions represented threat as significant as Japanese defensive fires, proper cold weather equipment, and training being essential for maintaining combat effectiveness in an environment where routine operations became major challenges. The lesson that environmental factors could cause as many casualties as enemy fire would influence American military planning for future operations in cold weather climates, recognition that specialized preparation was necessary for Arctic warfare, rather than simply applying standard infantry tactics developed for temperate conditions. The recapture of Attu by May 30, 1943, removed last Japanese foothold on American territory, but at cost that exceeded initial planning estimates, American expectations of quick victory proving overly optimistic given combination of difficult terrain, severe weather, and determined Japanese resistance. Admiral Kincaid and General Landrum in after-action reports emphasized need for better cold weather equipment, more realistic training for Arctic operations, and greater appreciation for challenges of amphibious assault in extreme northern latitudes where conditions differed fundamentally from tropical Pacific campaigns that characterized most theater operations. The recommendation that future Arctic operations receive specialized planning and preparation reflected recognition that Attu experience had revealed significant gaps in American military capability to conduct warfare under extreme cold conditions. The strategic significance of Attu recapture extended beyond simple removal of Japanese forces from American territory to include demonstration of American capability to project naval and amphibious power into remote Arctic regions where environmental conditions challenged conventional military operations. The successful employment of battleship gunfire support, carrier-based air power, and coordinated amphibious assault in Aleutian conditions validated American naval dominance in northern Pacific and eliminated any Japanese threat to Alaska mainland that occupation of Attu and Kiska might have enabled. The symbolic importance of reclaiming American soil from Japanese occupation justified campaign costs to American public and political leadership. Though military professionals recognized that resources expended on peripheral Aleutian operations might have achieved greater strategic results if employed in Central or Southern Pacific, where decisive campaigns were being fought closer to Japanese home islands. The performance of American naval forces during Attu operation demonstrated effectiveness of battleship gunfire support for amphibious operations, USS Pennsylvania and USS Idaho providing sustained fire support throughout campaign despite challenging weather conditions and visibility limitations that complicated fire control. The 14 and 16-inch guns proved capable of destroying even heavily fortified Japanese positions when fire could be accurately directed, though fog conditions meant that much naval gunfire was expended on area bombardments rather than precision strikes against identified targets. The lesson that naval gunfire remained effective supporting arm even under adverse conditions would influence future American amphibious operations. Recognition that battleship guns provided firepower that no land-based artillery could match, and that naval presence offshore offered flexible fire support that could be shifted rapidly to support changing tactical situations. The air operations supporting Attu assault highlighted challenges of conducting air warfare in Arctic conditions where weather dominated operational planning more completely than enemy action. B-24 and B-25 bombers flying missions only when visibility and cloud sealing permitted safe operations over volcanic terrain where navigation errors could prove fatal. The limited effectiveness of strategic bombing against dispersed Japanese defensive positions validated emphasis on close air support missions where fighter bombers could engage point targets with greater precision than high-altitude bombers, though fog conditions during much of Attu campaign prevented effective employment of either strategic or tactical air power. The P-38 Heat-weight Lightning fighters proved capable Arctic operations aircraft with twin-engine reliability and performance characteristics suited to long overwater flights and combat operations in cold temperatures, validating design decisions that emphasized range and engine redundancy over single-engine types that offered lower cost but less capability for demanding northern operations. The Japanese defense of Attu under Colonel Yamasaki demonstrated that determined garrison in prepared positions could extract significant cost from attacking forces even when outnumbered and facing overwhelming firepower superiority. Japanese casualties approaching 100% compared to American casualties around 30%, reflecting Japanese decision to fight to end rather than surrender when tactical situation became hopeless. The effectiveness of Japanese defensive positions constructed in volcanic terrain showed value of extensive engineering preparation and terrain exploitation. Bunkers positioned on reverse slopes, proving difficult to suppress with artillery or naval gunfire, and requiring direct assault by infantry, supported by tanks and demolition teams. The Japanese emphasis on nighttime operations and infiltration tactics partially offset American advantages in supporting fires, though limited Japanese ammunition supply restricted ability to sustain defensive fires during extended engagements. The medical lessons from Attu campaign emphasized importance of preventing and treating cold weather injuries that could disable soldiers as effectively as enemy fire. American medical services developing protocols for rapid warming of frostbite casualties and for maintaining body temperature of wounded during evacuation from forward positions to rear area medical facilities. The high rate of trench foot among American infantry demonstrated need for better waterproof footwear and for regular foot care that prevented accumulation of moisture that led to tissue damage in cold conditions, simple preventive measures proving more effective than treatment of established injuries that often required evacuation and lengthy recovery periods. The psychological effects of combat in isolated fog-shrouded environment where visibility was severely limited created unique mental health challenges. Soldiers experiencing disorientation and anxiety from inability to see comrades or maintain awareness of tactical situation during operations where sudden close-range contact with enemy forces was constant possibility. The comparison between Battle of Attu and subsequent American operation against Kiska highlighted role of intelligence and Japanese operational decisions in determining campaign outcomes. Kiska garrison successfully evacuating under cover of fog before American invasion force arrived in August 1943, whereas Attu garrison stood and fought, resulting in near-total Japanese casualties. The Japanese decision to evacuate Kiska rather than repeat Attu defense reflected recognition that isolated garrisons without hope of reinforcement or supply could not sustain prolonged defense against American forces with naval and air superiority, pragmatic choice to preserve forces for employment elsewhere rather than sacrificing them in hopeless defensive battles. The contrast between bloody Attu campaign and bloodless Kiska occupation demonstrated that operational outcomes depended on more than just relative force strengths, timing and command decisions playing crucial roles in determining whether battles would be fought and what costs would be incurred by opposing forces. The technological lessons from Attu emphasized importance of equipment designed for Arctic conditions rather than adapting temperate climate equipment for cold weather use. Weapons and vehicles requiring specialized lubricants that remained functional at -30 degrees, communications equipment needing protection against moisture that could freeze and damage sensitive electronics, and clothing systems designed for layering that allowed soldiers to regulate body temperature during varying levels of physical activity. The American military's recognition that standard equipment issued for European or Pacific operations was inadequate for Arctic warfare led to development of specialized Arctic gear, including vapor barrier boots, layered clothing systems, and cold weather lubricants for weapons and vehicles that would improve American capability for future operations in extreme northern latitudes. The legacy of Battle of Attu in American military history remained disproportionately small compared to battle's significance as only land combat on American soil during World War II and as demonstration of challenges inherent in Arctic amphibious warfare. Relatively few Americans aware that Japanese forces occupied Alaska Territory for nearly a year or that bitter campaign was fought to recapture wind-swept volcanic islands at edge of habitable world. The historical obscurity reflected both remote location far from major population centers and peripheral status in broader Pacific War narrative that focused on campaigns with clearer strategic significance, such as Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa operations that directly threatened Japanese home islands. The soldiers who fought on Attu, whether American or Japanese, experienced warfare fundamentally different from tropical Pacific campaigns that characterized theater, combat, where fog limited visibility to meters, where cold caused casualties comparable to enemy fire, and where volcanic terrain channeled operations along predictable routes that defenders could cover with devastating effect. The memorial to American and Japanese forces who fought on Attu stands on island that has returned to wind-swept isolation since battle. Volcanic landscape gradually reclaiming defensive positions, and battlefield debris as harsh Arctic environment slowly erodes physical evidence of combat. The few visitors who make journey to remote location experience firsthand the environmental conditions that made Attu campaign uniquely difficult, understanding viscerally how combat operations must have been complicated by fog, cold, and terrain that tested human endurance even without considering added stress of combat against determined enemy. The battlefield preservation allows modern military personnel to study Arctic warfare lessons in environment where those lessons were originally learned. Attu serving as outdoor laboratory, demonstrating how terrain and weather affect tactical operations, and how proper preparation and equipment remain essential for successful military operations in extreme environments. The naval gunfire support that proved so effective during Attu campaign established precedent for future American amphibious operations throughout Pacific Theater, battleships and cruisers providing sustained fire support that softened Japanese defenses and maintained pressure on defenders throughout campaigns. The USS Pennsylvania and USS Idaho that bombarded Attu would go on to provide fire support at numerous subsequent Pacific operations, including Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa campaigns. Their 14- and 16-inch guns remaining valuable assets throughout war, despite predictions that battleships would be made obsolete by carrier aviation. The Attu experience validated concept of naval gunfire as indispensable component of amphibious warfare, recognition that infantry assaults required heavy supporting fires to suppress defenders and destroy fortifications that led to continued employment of battleships in shore bombardment role even as carrier aviation dominated naval warfare at strategic and operational levels. The Arctic warfare experience gained during Attu campaign contributed to American military doctrine development for cold weather operations, lessons about equipment requirements, tactical procedures, and medical support, informing planning for potential future conflicts in northern latitudes where environmental conditions would challenge conventional military operations. The recognition that specialized training and equipment were necessary for Arctic warfare rather than simple adaptation of standard procedures developed for temperate climates influenced American military preparation for Cold War scenarios that might have involved operations in Arctic regions. Attu experience providing foundation for understanding how extreme cold affected military capabilities and what preparations were necessary to maintain combat effectiveness in such environments. The battle demonstrated conclusively that environmental factors could dominate military operations as completely as enemy action, that proper preparation for Arctic conditions was essential rather than optional, and that forces unprepared for extreme cold would suffer catastrophic non-combat casualties regardless of their tactical proficiency or determination. The Battle of Attu, when Japanese invasion of Alaska met American determination to reclaim territory, regardless of cost or difficulty, remains a unique chapter in Pacific War history. Arctic warfare that demonstrated American capability to project power even to most remote and inhospitable locations, when strategic or symbolic considerations required military action. The frozen volcanic island where USS Pennsylvania's 14-inch guns demolished Japanese bunkers, where B-24 Liberators dropped bombs through Arctic fog, where General Landrum's infantry assaulted Engineer Hill and Fish Hook Ridge, and where Colonel Yamasaki's final banzai charge marked end of Japanese resistance on American soil, serves as permanent reminder that modern warfare respects no boundaries of geography or climate, that naval power and air superiority could enable successful amphibious operations even under extreme Arctic conditions, and that properly equipped and supported forces could overcome environmental challenges as formidable as any enemy opposition.